All right, here we are, December 16th of 2020 on the DevTalkShow. I'm here with Andy. Andy Schwam and Chris Gomez are here, and we just wanted to kind of continue that virtual parking lot conversation, right?
Yeah.
Because we had, if you're from this area, we had Philly.net tonight, and Philly.net was about Git and GitHub in the year 2021, which it's going to be here in just a little over 2 weeks.
God.
So
really? I mean,
yeah.
it can't come soon enough, really. I don't know why I'm saying wow, because it's like we've all been begging for it.
Yeah. So, what was interesting is that was more of a technical conversation. Like, hey, you can do this in Visual Studio, or hey, you can do this with GitHub Actions, building code, deploying code, or hey, you can do this with GitHub Codespaces, having your development environment in the cloud. But we didn't talk about like everything else that happens with source control. And I mean, how long do you think you've been using source control?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, it's got to be when I started doing development, which was in it was a while ago, it's 20 years at least, because I didn't start doing it right away. I think when I started doing software, we were still using zip files and stuff like that. And probably started, you know what I mean? It wasn't really, that wasn't source control. When did Visual SourceSafe get popular? That would probably be when I started. And by the way, I'm going to interrupt for 1 second. I feel like we should mention, if you're looking at the screen, if you're watching us now, you see there's me, and then there's Chris in the middle, and then there's this big empty box, which is a space that is reserved for our producer emeritus, right?
Yeah.
Rich Ross, who's taken the night off, and it's above my technical abilities to take that part of the screen away, so we're just leaving that there for him. Just figured it's worth mentioning if people were looking. But yeah, so Chris, when did SourceSafe? I mean, I feel like I could Google that right now, but was that around then?
So I remember using it. I remember coming to a place in '98 that was already using it. I also recall earlier than that, it was used at another shop, but not for source code the way you would think of it. It was more like an asset manager. It was being used as like an asset manager, even though you weren't even supposed to use it for that then.
Okay. Yeah,
but really, somebody just wanted to have versions of these assets, and they were like images and stuff.
Yeah, I'm looking online at Wikipedia, Visual SourceSafe page, and it talks about a version. The first version it says on here is 3.1, which is interesting. I don't know what happened before that, but that was 95. And then version 6 was 98, and something tells me that's when it got popular. Then there's not another version of it from then for maybe this should have been our indicator that this was not the source control of the future. It looks like it didn't get updated for 8 years. So
yeah,
it was the same Visual SourceSafe, right? They didn't add incremental features weekly we get nowadays.
Yeah. There were other products out then. I know there was Perforce.
Yeah.
And I feel like there were some other ones too. Before IBM bought Rational, there was something. ClearCase, but ClearCase may not have been out then.
Hey, Mike's here on chat. You see that? Mike Shea.
Oh yeah, awesome.
Back with us. He started using it around 96, 97. So maybe I was dabble. I don't know when I started using it, but I think the point of your question, though, really is it's been a long time that we've been using source control systems, right? This isn't new per se.
Right. It's not new. A lot of us who work in the Microsoft space are going to talk about SourceSafe because what happened was that was probably about the same time that organizations were buying MSDN licenses, and so it was free, right? So you're going to pick free,
and it was and it came. By the way, free meant it came on one of those on the disks, right? That big box that would show up with all the MSDN disks. But I could digress, and we could talk about that forever.
Yeah. So here's the thing, right? We're talking about something. We're not talking about something that's new. We're talking about something that's been around a very long time, and yet to this day, there are still discussions, parameters set up for teams. Like, I feel arguments, some of them very passionate, and a lot of conversation about what you should do. And I said something to you earlier tonight that I kind of stuck in my head as I wonder if this should be on a T-shirt. Is that, I've used a few things. I've used CVS, I've used Subversion. I dabbled with Perforce because I was fortunate enough that was a commercial product, to get to use it for a little bit. And then obviously Git is the one that's here today. And I do like using Git. I've learned a lot about it. People know that I talk a lot about it. When I was at the Kalahari at your conference at Tech Bash, I would get in more than a few times. I would get in the elevator, and look, people were cool. Somebody got in and said, "Oh, hey, what's up? You're the Git guy."
Yeah.
Like, whatever. It's
not
bad
so bad. That's
right?
Recognition, baby. That's
yeah. There's nothing wrong with it. But this is what should be on a T-shirt. Is source control, pretty easy, works great until you add more than one person to the team.
Yeah.
Use it by yourself to manage your work. Piece of cake. Add one other person, and it's like,
yeah.
Then,
I've had conversations.
You want to start coordinating, yeah.
Yeah, I've had conversations with people on that topic where we talk about, well, how familiar are you with Git? When someone joins a team. Well, I've been using it myself on my side projects, for a year, whether it was Git, whether it was TFS, whatever the version control was, right? Using it on your own, you're right. It's really true. It just gets harder now when you add people. But here's the point: it's supposed to work for multiple people, right?
That's what it's for.
Yeah,
yeah.
I think what's interesting is that, like you're saying, we still have these discussions about source control and debates about source control. We still have a lot of frustration points for people that have been using it for a long time, and so my point is 20 years in and we're still not good at it. And I mean we as the big picture. I think a lot of developers are not good at it, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm not calling anybody out. I'm not good at it, right? A lot of teams struggle with it. It really is a pain point, I think, for a lot of teams. And that's a shame that it's a pain point, because this should be, we talk about when we build software, what do we always talk about? The plumbing. The plumbing should be the easy part. And isn't source control the plumbing? Wouldn't you want to categorize it in that way?
Well, it's certainly become necessary. And I don't think it's just because we have it. Some of it is the pace at which we're trying to release.
That's true.
It wasn't all that long ago that you might have released, depending on where you worked, you might have released software once a year. I mean, how often was Windows released?
Well,
every 3 to 5 years at one time.
Yeah. So we didn't do merges wasn't an everyday occurrence in the right. You're saying that we would work on stuff for a long time, and eventually we'd have to bring it all together. But we could deal with that later, right?
Yeah. It might have seemed like the Dark Ages, but then again, it wasn't the same kind of thing. I mean, heck, there were shops that I knew of where there wasn't an official build machine. Remember those build machines?
I thought basically what happened was the build machine.
Well, some developer was like, "Hey, I got it all working," and that was the code we copied. We copied that code, and then eventually you realized that was pretty dangerous. So you'd have a build machine.
Yeah.
But it's not meant to reminisce. It's meant to talk about how, even today, you're going to start a new project. You set up that Git repo, and everything's going gangbusters until you add one other person, and
Yeah.
or a team, and what happens, and I'm this is not meant to be disparaging, so I don't want anyone to take it this way, but a lot of us can probably name the rules that a team has. Maybe you can't. Maybe you're not supposed to ever commit to the trunk, or the main, or the master, or whatever your team calls that mainline uh, branch. Maybe you're always supposed to use feature branches. Okay, fine. Now, sometimes teams say, well, they should be named. Like the feature branch should be named with the issue number. So now we're combining it with another system. And I'm not even trying to talk about Git here. I'm just talking about whatever. I don't
Right.
care
This
what you were
isn't Git.
using.
This is source control
Yeah.
in general, right? Yeah.
Just whatever you were using. And, um, you know, one of the things that I do think the pull request spawned was a natural, the Git pull request, and I don't mean to keep bringing it back, it was a natural stopping point to intervene with the code review. That's based on the product. It's not that you couldn't have code reviews with any other product. In fact, we did. I worked on teams that did. It just, there wasn't this natural, there was like, okay, well, are you ready for the code review? Yeah. Okay, well, where's the code?
You know, again, this is going to sort of be like the reminiscing part of the show, but TFS actually did a fair job with code reviews. I thought, like, they tried to introduce a mechanism for it, and they had that ability to do. I'm just trying to think of how it worked, but I think that was with a shelf set or something like that, and you could sort of send someone the code, you know, like to do a code review. It was like an actual
like
item. Like it was a type of a work item actually in that system, I guess, called a code review.
Yeah.
If I remember, I don't use it anymore, but it was an attempt, right? It was a similar concept. It sort of lost out. Like it didn't win that battle of like what's the best model for doing things. And who knows if we're on the best model for doing things now, right? We talk about Git. You keep bringing back Git, right? And that's a natural thing because Git is sort of taken over, I think, when it comes to source control. But in 2 years, we might be talking about something totally different, right? I don't know. Who knows what the new model will be. But I was thinking as you were talking, by the way, I think I found the name for the show. Chris and I were trying to think of what are we going to call this episode, right? And I think it should be like 2020. Why is source control still hard? Something like that. Like, because that's really what it is. Like, wow, here we are in 2020, and we're still struggling with source control. You were talking about naming. I digressed a little bit. Now you were talking about naming.
That's just one thing.
Yeah, it's one thing, right? I wanted to back up on the naming topic a little bit. You were talking about branch naming, and how about repo naming? So one of the problems we run into is we've got now in my organization we use Git. We use Git within Azure DevOps, right? So we use Azure DevOps Git, and so we have like a whole bunch of repos that are in the same, I guess you call it in the same organization, right? Would be more of a GitHub vernacular, but in the same project in our Azure DevOps, and so there's no folders in there. Right, and to me that's a pain point. Like, I don't know why Git can't do folders, but instead we came up with a naming convention to pretend to be folders, and so we use prefixes on all of our Git repos. And I don't know if that's something you can do or consider, or am I crazy? Like, is there a better way to do that? But we take like an abbreviation for the name of the team. So if the name of the team was the DevTalkShow, we'd probably say TDTS _. And then the repo name. And then if you search for TDTS, you get all those repos that belong to that team, right? Do you do something like that? Or is that just me? Am I doing that wrong?
I've seen similar before, although I don't know if it was for that reason.
Okay.
I'm not saying that. In fact, when come to think of it, it could be to get that, like, to basically get essentially what you're getting is like this cheap indexing.
Yeah, organization, right? It's just a mess without it.
Yeah, because otherwise, if you only named it by, you've made the decision to have multiple repos for a team, or maybe for a product, or whatever your categorization is.
This is for the whole company, as a matter of fact, right? This is for the whole department.
Yeah. If you didn't do that, then I know what the pain point would be, is that sure, they might be alphabetized, but okay, I need to get this repo, scroll, I need to get this repo. You kind of have this quick visual, all the products that this team works on.
Right.
I might not be using those terms correctly for your example, but the repos that this team works on. They are together. I don't necessarily think it's wrong. I'm thinking back over the last several orgs and places I've been, whether it's current or before, and yeah, I've definitely seen some kind of prefixing or some kind of thing that basically makes it clear that this belongs, to the one group or team or whatever.
But you don't do that. I'm just curious. Like, I was just wondering if you don't.
Oh, I see it now. Yeah. I mean, yeah, where I work now.
Oh, you do? Okay.
I don't know if that was the intention. Right. But when I think about it, it's like, well, they are all grouped together. So I guess they are.
So you were talking about naming, though. So do you have a policy for naming branches? Because this show, we're just, by the way, for people that are just hanging out with us tonight, whether you're vocal in the chat or not, if you're just coming in, we're just talking about source control. This is just a show where we're just sort of throwing around topics about how we use source control and how it's problematic, how it's helped us, how best practices. Just right. This is just
yeah. I mean, we'd like to hear what works, and then we'd also like to maybe hear what doesn't. But I think there is a caveat: is that there probably are things that would work for one team, and that could be based on the people, but it also could be based on what they're building that don't work for someone else.
Yeah.
So I don't think it would be fair for me to say this is the only way. You asked a little bit earlier, like, do I have a policy when it comes to naming branches? And the reality is I personally don't. It's not something that if I come to a team and I'm like gung-ho to say, hey, everybody, here are the things that I think we should do because I think it works. That's not going to be on my list.
No, and it's not on my list. I thought it was interesting that you brought it up. You mentioned, I guess you've heard of teams naming a repo for like a work item or something like that, like the number of a feature or something like that, right? Is that what you were saying?
A branch, yeah. It might be tied directly to an ID. So you mentioned something like TFS. TFS, Team Foundation Server, was trying to bring it all together.
Oh yeah.
It very plainly said, I was your work item management, your sprint board, and your source control, and whatever else it did. And so, you had that stuff tightly integrated. But sometimes a team, either because they might choose to use different products. I know some of this is all coming together in products like GitHub and GitHub Enterprise now, or Bitbucket and all the different ones. But there was a time where you might use Subversion, and Subversion wouldn't be connected to anything unless somebody wrote some kind of modular plugin or something. So yes, I have seen it where thou shalt name all branches feature -1211b, and I didn't like it so much. I think it made more sense if I'm going to say that it made sense. It made more sense in Subversion, because in Subversion, branches really were copies of the repo. The files were different. Mm-hmm. And the reason I don't like it for Git is because, and I've said this before on this show, is Git is more about the graph of commits that are going in one direction, but they'll branch and they'll come back together and so on. And so I think you can get into a bad place where the developers themselves, they're more worried about what branch they're on, and they think they're on like a totally different street or an avenue when really they're not. And the next commit is going to be the parent. The next commit is going to be the child of a commit on trunk and on feature and on something else. And you got to, I think, pay closer attention to that. So that's partially why I'm that way, is I'm personally a fan of, hey, short-lived branch to do some work only because I don't want to interrupt anyone else. That's the main reason. I don't want to bother anyone else. Like, that's a real key thing for me. I have come to appreciate version control for its ability for me to work without bothering you.
That's a good way to describe it, actually. I think you've put it into like terminology that, and you have a good knack for doing this kind of thing, Chris, where you take something complex or whatever, but let's boil it down to the real reason, right? I don't want to bother you, and that is a really clean and clear way to express the value of branching, right? Because that's really all we're trying. I mean, you can get into all these other reasons, but I don't want to bother you. I like that. I think this is beautiful, you know.
Yeah, and so I've used that same metaphor for forks, because the concept of a fork, as it was presented to us in GitHub several years ago, was very confusing to developers. When I started doing Git talks, and believe me, not to criticize them, I'm glad they came. There were people who were clearly there to heckle and argue. They were there because they heard about this newfangled Git thing, and they were like, I don't understand. I can do all this in my current source control system. And I never fought that. I was like, yeah, sure, of course you can, right? He says, well, what's so special about clicking the fork button? I say, you know what I like about it? Is I get my own clone and copy of the repo in my account, and no matter what I do, the people over there aren't bothered by it. And then later, I will present them a gift. I will present them a clean pull request, which is my gift to them, that hopefully, and see, because you don't have to do this, this is why it can seem messy. If I'm smart about it, I shouldn't use the word smart. If I use my experience because I've done all the wrong things before, if I use the experience that I have so that the commits that I'm going to present to you build right on your latest main line, then you're going to look, oh, wow, this is easy. What an easy commit to take. Thank you. Whereas what gets scary as the maintainer, whether you're an open source project or you're at work, is when you get that pull request and you're looking at it and you're going, man, I'm not really 100% sure what this thing's touching.
Right. Yeah, I don't listen. You've talked about forks for a long time, right? And I think you've said, because I don't use forks, and I think you've said in the past that Azure DevOps doesn't really have forking in Git or something like that. Maybe you said that, maybe you didn't, but I thought you did.
It is. It's different.
And so I honestly don't understand the difference. To me, what you just said sounded like a branch. You're like, I will get a copy of it, which I know a branch isn't truly a copy, but when you said I can give you a commit back, a pull request for my branch, and you just merge it in, I'm thinking, I thought that's what branches was for. So how is the branch actually different? If you don't mind, like, how is a branch actually different than a fork?
So you in a much nicer way, which I appreciate, asked the same question that the heckler would ask, was like, I can do all this with branches. It's like, yeah, you absolutely can do all this with branches. And in Azure DevOps, I might tell you that it really is the best way to do it. And it's because there is a fork button in Azure DevOps now. I remember it being announced. Oh. And I remember thinking, oh, that's cool, because I really do like forks. And then when I saw the implementation, I went, oh, I guess. And the reason why is because there is a root in Azure DevOps to every repo, and it's the project. It's not a person, it's a project, right? When you go into Azure DevOps, mm-hmm. and previously you create a project, and then you start creating boards and repos and stuff under it. When you fork a repo in Azure DevOps, you have to pick a project to fork it to. Most organizations, a different project. That doesn't make, let's just talk about concretely, that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Like, you have your project. It's,
we don't
your
have
organization's built around it.
We use only one project. We have 500 Visual Studio projects, but those aren't...
it's not the same thing. We're talking about the Azure DevOps project.
Right.
Yeah. You're right about that, is that most organizations don't go around creating millions of projects, because that's a maintenance nightmare. Right. So instead, what you would have to do if you really wanted to fork an Azure DevOps is you, Andy, would create a project on your works Azure DevOps server that you're in, and then you'd have a copy of the repo over there. And it's just not worth the effort. It's not, in my opinion.
I got a bad feeling about this.
I certainly, if somebody had a great use case for it, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm just saying that I don't think it's the point. So let's talk about the original fork from GitHub. if I'm attributing it to them incorrectly, I apologize. But I'm pretty sure
Well,
that was the
in
first time we
general,
all
I thought it was
saw it.
I always thought the feature like a fork or a branch. I thought that is like in the nature of Git, which is the main. Like I don't even know what you call that. Like GitHub is a
Branches, yes.
Yeah, branches, but not forks. Okay.
Not forks. So Git is just a product. It's both a command line utility that basically kind of talks to a Git server on your behalf.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the early days of Git, when Linus invented this thing, he had like a Git server running on his network somewhere. And he was pushing his work to that Git server. And then the idea is everybody in his network that trusted his work could just pull from that server anytime they wanted. They could just clone from it, or they could pull the commits or whatever. And what GitHub did, whether right or wrong, is it sort of reconsolidated distributed source control again.
Definitely. Yeah.
Because Linus's whole take was like, my repo is my repo, your repo is your repo. You shouldn't care what's in my repo. But I am the maintainer of Linux, so I trust this circle of people that if there's stuff, if there are commits that they've taken, I trust that they've done a good job of due diligence and making sure they're okay. So I'm willing to pull those commits.
Yeah.
He thought of it more of as a web of trust.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That's not how we use it.
You were mentioning that he had that server over there, and you're saying how he said, well, you could take it, anyone could take from that server. I remember the early pitches that I heard about Git were all about there is no server. It's like you can take it from anywhere. Like you were just saying now, this sort of like this web of things. And
Right.
I remember just not really grasping how that was a good thing. Like I really struggled with that. And I think a lot of people did.
Let's be honest. It's not what happened.
It's not what happened. It's not the Git of today, right?
No. I don't mind having the conversation about how Git was intended to be used by Linus and how I even think, the decentralized nature of it, because there is some value if you learn it. It can help you get out of sticky situations, but the reality is that in the end, most teams, we pick a central server.
Sure.
And we say, look, that's the really important one.
Right.
So you ask, like, what's a fork then?
Yeah,
well,
let's
a
go
fork
back to that. Yeah.
is a fork is nothing. So let's talk about how GitHub works. GitHub is not project based. It's account based. The root of everything is an account.
Mm-hmm.
They did add a feature called organizations later, but at first, the repo had to be under Spaceshot, which is my GitHub user account. And Microsoft has an account called Microsoft. I actually think it's an organization. And then you have one. And everybody has one. And repos belong to accounts, which means fundamentally they belong to people. So now what happened is in order to get around the real problem of, wait a second, I want people to work on Ruby in the open. I'm going to go create a fake user called Ruby, which makes perfect sense. There's no one person who is Ruby.
Right.
So many years ago, this is not a new feature. GitHub came along and said, look, let's create organizations. They work just like people. They're just a name, and that name's got to be free. There can only be one Ruby. That name's got to be out there. But then what you can do is you can set up permissions so that Andy's an owner and Chris is an owner and Mike Shea's, everybody's an owner, or everybody who should be is an owner. Everyone who should be is an owner. But now, so what do we need forks for? Well, what if it is an open source project? Something I can't do, which you can do at your work Azure DevOps project, is I can't imagine all the permissions or even maintain all the permissions I need just so people can work with me. People can offer code to me. I can't, if they clone my repo, if they clone my locked down, so to speak, it's not really locked down, it's in the open, anyone can clone, but only certain people can push. Mm-hmm. If they clone that Ruby repo and then they want to contribute to Ruby, they've got nowhere to push those commits to, not even for safekeeping. They can keep committing to their local drive, but unless they go set up a Git server somewhere, it's just stuck on their drive.
Okay.
So the reason for the fork is to say, make a copy, make a clone of that repo, put it under my account where I'm the owner.
Okay.
I do whatever I want. I now have the ability to commit here And then the purpose of the pull request was to say, okay, folks, I've got an idea. See these commits? I want you to take them and add them to your graph. And because commits are immutable, it's going to be based on some commit you already have. And what you basically say by accepting the pull request is, yeah, those 5 commits look good and they should be attached onto our graph as well. Thank you very much. I'm free to throw the repo away now. Who cares? I don't need it anymore. I could reclone it, or I could update it. I could do whatever I wanted.
So sounds to me like a fork is, and I'm forgetting the terminology here, but like, what's it called? Not root.
Well,
sounds
a clone.
like what's that?
It's a clone.
No, okay, yeah. It sounds to me like it's a clone. It's a branch, if you want to call it that. But when you do that, you change the what's it called? Not the what's the server address? What it's called? It's called the
Well, the owner, the account.
No, that's not what I mean.
If we didn't,
what do you call it?
If we didn't have GitHub,
yeah,
it would be like if we didn't have GitHub, it would be like if I cloned from your server at your house, and then I just basically said, well, look, now I have my repo. I'm the owner of my own local machine. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to push it over to the Git server here in my...
Right. Oh, Chris just locked up. Chris looks like he is locked up, everybody. Yep, we lost Chris for a minute. He'll be back in a minute. We are just here hanging out, talking about source control. Chris is back. I was just saying, we're just hanging out, talking about source control.
It's twice now.
Chris has... sometimes we have glitches. The internet, maybe it's the snow outside. Let's blame it on that, right? And by the way, is it still snowing? Have you looked lately?
I haven't looked in the last couple hours.
I wonder. It was coming down really hard. I can't tell because it's dark out. I don't know if the snow stopped, but I think it's going to be a mess here in the East Coast. We're both in the Philadelphia suburbs. I don't know where everyone that's watching might be, but we're hitting our first messy storm. We've actually got more snow today than we have in something like 600 days, whatever. I mean, last year, it's been a long time since we've had any legitimate snow on the east, and so I guess I won't be driving to the office tomorrow, huh? Like, does that matter? We don't drive no one goes to the office anymore, so but my kid's school, by the way, called a snow day tomorrow, and we were really surprised because we thought they were going to say, well, just learn virtually. And the superintendent wrote a really nice note. I'll share this with you. This is like way off topic here. The superintendent wrote a really nice note, and I think what she was really trying to say is, we just all need a day. Like, it's fine. Snow days are a magical thing, when you're a kid, right? I think she was really just trying to say, is it so bad to go out and play in the snow and come in and have a hot chocolate when you come in, and, just watch a little TV and be with the family and have a snow day? And I thought that was kind of cool because they could have easily just said, you got your Chromebooks, everybody keep working.
Right.
I thought it was neat.
Yeah.
But, when you froze, I was starting to do the little commercial that we do sometimes. Oh, Falcon's here. Hey, Falcon says exactly. Yeah, I'm glad you get it. I don't know where Falcon lives, or maybe you're in the same school district as us. Who knows? But anyway, if you're here, thanks for joining us today. We're going to keep talking for a while, but we take a break and say thanks for being here, and thanks for joining us, whether it's live or whether you're watching us in the future on YouTube. What do we say? Pound. What do they say? What is it? Kill that like button or subscribe button or pound it. Slam it.
Smash the like.
Smash it. I always get that wrong. Smash that like button. Become a member of our team and our little community. And have some fun with us from time to time. We're here generally Wednesday nights, although I think we're taking off the next 2 weeks for the holidays. We're here generally Wednesday nights at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. So Falcon's outside of Harrisburg. You're probably getting slammed with snow more than we are, I think. But maybe not, because you're not north, so it really depends on how that line is. But Falcon said it right there. Be a kid, right? I'm going to probably play a little hooky. I don't know if my boss is watching. I'm probably going to play a little hooky tomorrow for an hour or two and play in the snow with the kids, I've digressed, but, it's a talk show. We can do that.
Yeah. If you're watching on Twitch, hit the follow button, too, and you'll know when we go live. So
yeah, totally. Yeah, my Mike says he wants to go out and play. My kids were outside already. They were so psyched. We had maybe 2 inches of snow. They were already out. They were just like, I'm out the door, playing in the snow, and having some fun. But what else I wrote down a whole bunch of like sort of throw out topics for the whole Git topic, right? We could talk about whatever we want to talk about. You were talking about pull requests earlier, and you were saying like how do you guys manage pull requests, right? Oh, thanks Falcon for the comment. Falcon says great series on Solid, by the way. We had a good time with that. I think it was fun. One of the beautiful things about the Solid talk, selfishly as the hosts that we are, it's not always easy to come up with topics for these shows. And so Solid gave us like 5 shows, right? We're like, okay, we now have 5 topics to cover. If there are anything else, like there's not that many topics that are specifically broken up into like 5 things like that. If we could find some more, we could do more shows like that, like a series of things. And Falcon, thanks for saying you've seen the talks at Philly.net. We love Philly.net. And Bill was talking today about Code Camp coming up in January. Maybe I'll do my Solid talk. It was nice. We did probably 5 hours on Solid, right? And I sometimes cram it into an hour. And you're right, it wasn't a deep dive, but maybe I will do a cram down session for Philly Code Camp. We'll see what comes up. But I was thinking about we were talking about like sort of best practices for pull requests. One of the problems I think a lot of teams have, I know I have this problem, so I'm not pointing a finger at anybody else, but getting to other people's pull requests is challenging, right? And so how do people deal with that? I'd like to know how we keep those pull requests moving along in an organization, right? How do we do that? And then maybe we can come back later and talk. Falcon's asking about serverless Azure functions, which would be a great topic, by the way. I think we could do a show on that. I like Azure functions a lot. But anyway, how do you guys, Chris? Do you guys have like any advice in your organization for that, keeping the pull request process moving along?
So are you saying that like for you, the pull request is like the first step in accepting work, and sometimes things can get hung up in there? I guess
what I mean is the code like there's a step, right? There's going to be a pull request. We need to do a code review, and then we want to merge it in, right?
Yeah.
And so I've got some code. I've worked on some great stuff. I send it over to you, Chris, because we're coworkers in this imaginary world. And what happens? You guys know Chris, right? Chris is out to lunch. Chris is hanging around. He's probably, schmoozing around the office. And I've got this pull request, and I'm trying to get this code reviewed and put in, right?
Yep.
And of course, I'm making fun of, Chris a little bit here. But, or you're doing your work. You're, like, busy dealing with other problems. How do you keep that process moving, right?
Yeah. So what's interesting is we talked just a couple weeks ago. There was a talk that I brought up about teams being effective, and it actually goes into this and says that the teams that are effective optimize. They figure out how to optimize the parts that they were just sitting around waiting on, and usually code review / pull request is one of them. So I think that there's probably a lot of different techniques. One of them is either that pull requests are assigned to people, which the tools of today usually let you do, or you might go some other way, just say, well, just as long as 2 people look at it.
Sure.
But then you kind of have those power reviewers who seem to just like, I'm not trying to say they're good or that's a whole different issue, but of whether they just click yes on everything. But it's just that, wow, there's some people who really get in there and review a lot of them, and then others that don't really do much of anything. What I think I'd kind of like to drill into a little bit that I think is interesting is like Mike Shea says, we use a Azure DevOps dashboard that's our team members' homepage. One of the panels is open PRs.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm certainly not as familiar with that as over in GitHub land. You know, when you click on pull requests there, I don't believe right away. Oh, it does right away filter with open. It does do that. I don't know what that means when you're a huge, a super popular repo with 1,000 of those things. That's a whole other problem.
I think some members of our team do what Mike suggests, right? Which is to have that list of open PRs. And that keeps them, but I would be curious to know if Mike would share and say, like, what's the general turnaround time on these things? Because just because we have it in front of us doesn't necessarily mean that the turnaround time is fast. Like, what should you even expect, though, as a developer?
Do you think that these kind of tools have moved us more towards the asynchronous code review versus maybe where I remember a time where people would actually get together in a conference room.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But I don't think the tooling was quite there. There was really no better way to do it than to actually sit there with the open solution or the open compiler and the editor. Didn't matter what you're using, where the what we're seeing in the pull request UI that kind of was born at GitHub was, okay, here it is, and here are the lines of code, and here's what's changing, and wow, you're seeing it in this really narrow context. In fact, do you even test it? Can you? In some systems that might be hard, but can you, or do you just kind of look at it and go like, eh?
Yeah, we get sometimes people just go, eh. That's a problem. People that just go, eh. So what you were talking about, though, a question came up in a workshop I was doing the other day and we've talked about this on our show. I'm kind of big on like organizations having standards and best practices. And so we do these workshops where we review those with teams. And one of the things we're talking about is, we have a requirement, code should have a pull request. Code should have a code review associated with a pull request. But, the standard is you have to get your code reviewed. And so someone said, someone asked me, do we have a standard on how that code review should be executed? Should it be asynchronous, as you mentioned? Should it be, the other extreme would be like, yeah, let's get 5 people into a conference room and talk about this code. And my answer was, well, of course my answer was the magical developer's answer to everything, which is, Chris,
it depends.
It depends, yeah. Right, exactly. It depends. But what I said is, the standard says, our best practices say we should have a code review. What mechanism you need for that code review is up to you and really depends on the scope of the code and the scope of the changes and all those kind of things, right? Sometimes I say, yeah, it's just you get it asynchronously, you do it. Sometimes there might be a little question and answer back and forth. And, Azure Repos Git has a good mechanism for commenting on those code reviews, those pull requests and things like that, asking questions. Sometimes it means we're getting together. We're going to do a paired programming or whatever it is because I really need you to walk me through this. That's usually a sign that the pull request is too big, I think. But sometimes it needs to be, right? So, but I think you're right. I think that the model that we're leaning towards these days, and I'm not saying that this should be this way, but I think it's evident from most people that I talk to that asynchronous code review now is become, I think, like the sort of go-to that, the thing that people want to have. It might not always work out that way, but that's what we're shooting for, I think, right? At least that's the way I tend to think of it that way. What's Mike saying in here? We also think of repos differently. Source needs 2 reviews. Git ops, none. So source, I think he means source code, like
right.
C# stuff needs 2 reviews.
Right.
Git ops, I guess, is and a repo,
which we can talk about because I actually have a website that I had open in case this came up.
Oh, that's kind of cool. I can share my screen if you'd like. I mean, I can share your screen out to the.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me do that. Let's put up Chris's screen. And yeah, so what are you going to share with us here?
So I just picked one thing. This was a blog from Weaveworks in 2017 where they wrote some people consider this like one of the first articles on GitOps where okay, so we have DevOps, right? Where part of the idea is and you know what? Look, DevOps means a lot of things to a lot of people, so I apologize if I don't hit the same notes that you want me to hit. But DevOps is about shifting the operations more towards development time, so that from the time you commit, you're getting code built, you're getting it deployed to either test servers. Maybe you were actually running tests on it. Hopefully, you're running tests and performance tests, and maybe security scans, and maybe you're even passing quality gates that put it right into production. It just depends. Nobody's the same part in this journey. So what's the idea of GitOps would be one thing anyways, is like, again, it's really adopting Git as the source of truth. So sometimes there's more to a product and its deployment than just the code. There might be some configuration or mapping where things go. And so you're keeping those somewhere. Where are you keeping those? Are they kept in other files? Are they kept in emails? Do people have to actually go RDP into machines? What if that was more automated, where you make a change to a Git repo and that actually changes configuration?
So you're talking about are you talking about the stuff that I typically call infrastructure as code, like that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Okay.
What if a connection string could be changed by committing it to Git somewhere? And I don't mean to the source code repository.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
Another example I think Mike is adding there is let's say part of your DevOps process is to install an MSI on a server, and that MSI takes an answer file. So you want to update the answer file. Well, you need a place to put it. So it's more than just putting it under source control, because that would be one thing. I want to clarify that I think, and Mike maybe can help here. I think that if you said we're doing GitOps, it's more than just putting this configuration under version control. It's also that the act of committing kicks things off in itself. Mm-hmm. Like, I've made this configuration change. The place where I make it is in this Git repo, and that kicks off updating maybe every machine or every container. I don't know. To try and tell you how it would work in every situation probably doesn't make sense. I think it came kind of from a Kubernetes world.
Isn't GitOps isn't that sort of isn't that a little too specific? Like you're naming it with the word Git in it, but it's really about putting things in some source control, like putting ops into source control and calling it GitOps. I don't know, that strikes me as odd.
Well, I think the reason why it's being differentiated from DevOps, is to go one step further and say the way you change the system is with a commit. You wouldn't even have a technician go to a machine and say, oh, I see the problem. We got to go to something.ini and change blah blah blah.
Right, but I'm saying the pattern is named for the type of repository solution that you're using, which is Git. I don't know, it just seems like the word Git shouldn't be in there, but hey, if that's the name that's being used out in the, I know you didn't invent it, I'm just saying, it seems like a strange name to me.
I really think that part of the reason is so it's not confused with DevOps. They really want to differentiate that something more is happening.
Sounds like it's config ops than DevOps, and then there's config ops, right? I don't know, something like that.
Well, that I don't know, because I'm not an expert, and I would love to talk about this, and I'm not 100% sure. I will concede that we could have two different people on practicing GitOps, and they could tell us two different things, or maybe I'm wrong, and there is some consensus that's beginning to form. I don't think I know enough to answer that. For example, when I talk about GitOps, maybe this particular Git repo has branches that describe deployments. And so by moving a change into a specific branch means that it should now go into that deployment. I'm not.
So we use YAML define. So a YAML pipeline, let's just say you're familiar with that, right? Like that, we use, I don't know if you use the same stuff we do, but we use Azure DevOps to do our deployments. We've got like a YAML pipeline. So is the YAML that defines, we have an ARM template that defines the infrastructure, and then the YAML decides, let's say, what's going to get deployed into where and things like that, right? Is that the kind of thing? Is that would go in your GitOps stuff?
I think, and again, what I really feel awful about is don't look at me as the expert. But I don't necessarily think GitOps means, okay, you've absolutely positively chosen this repository to be the placeholder configuration. I think it's the mindset of that. Even system changes happen through Git. I think that in the extreme, you would even say that changing environment variables on a specific deployment happens through Git. Like everything is recorded through Git.
It's killing me that we say like environment changes happen through Git. We should be saying, and I'm picking on you, I'm picking on us here. Environment changes happen through source control.
Well, I think there's a little bit of a concession that like, okay, source control's done. It's Git forever. I don't know if that's true. We can come back to this show in 2030 and we'll have the whatever happened to Git show.
Right. And
there'll be lots of young new developers saying like, yeah, you old timers keep talking about Git.
Well, the funny thing is people are going to be like, one day, people are going to be like talking about this GitOps. Oh, we do GitOps where I work. Why do they call it GitOps? I don't know. What's Git? I don't know. I haven't ever heard of Git because it's like long gone, right? But they're still calling it GitOps. I mean, who knows, right? I'm stuck. Sometimes I have a hard time shaking like a term, and I'm like, no, this is wrong, and I gotta let that go for the sake of the show here.
I mean, I certainly would like to have I'd like to talk about this some more and see like, what's the idea here. The other one is a little bit earlier when we were talking about how you lay out your repos. We did get this comment, and we really put it off for a while about like whether you use a mono repo, and that led me to this interesting Git repository. This is becoming common, by the way, the Git repository to hold documentation or to hold people's thoughts.
Yeah, it's a blog.
It's almost like publishing a book, except you just throw it up on Git, right?
Yeah, it's like a blog post, isn't it?
It's like a blog post, right? Is this person it's almost like a research paper.
Yeah.
What's the idea of a mono repo versus a poly repo? Because in my opinion, I don't want to speak for the account Joel Parker Henderson, but I feel that this account is not saying, I'm here to give you the answer. It's more like a research paper where it's talking about the benefits of each, the problems with each. What do proponents of one say? What do proponents of others say? What are opinions about?
It's not opinionated, is what you'd say, right? It's just giving us the facts.
At the very end, I think he does have some. Well, I shouldn't say. I think Joel Parker Henderson has opinions at the end, but I don't know if they are necessarily like, I promise you this is the way. I think it's more like, here's what I've observed, and so maybe there are benefits.
Well, let's talk about. Right? Let's back up a little bit. So, what's a mono repo versus poly repo, right? I mean, those are terms we use, but what does that mean for people that are
right? I thought it was interesting to see a nickname that means using one repository for the source code management version control system. I guess it would mean that you've walked into an organization, and to be fair, it may not be one repo, but where you're seeing multiple projects, multiple things that you might have thought like, wow, I really feel like this service should be in another repo, but they're like, nope, we're keeping it in a mono repo.
So yeah, I tend to put things. I'm thinking like, where have I done mono repo, right? I think a lot of times we have projects in and just in their own, let's call it their own repo, right? But there are times where I've built systems where I say, so maybe this is an example, right? If I'm building an Angular front end and an MVC, maybe like a web API, right? And maybe I have a couple of other services and things like that. And these are technically different Visual Studio projects. Maybe they're in the same solution. We've talked about this in the past. Visual Studio has this thing called a solution, but that doesn't always exist in other programming paradigms, right? A project is a project. And And so if I was building that solution that has the Angular front end and the web API back end, storing those together, is that what we would call like a mono repo, right? Because it's one repo for two separate projects?
I think I want to be careful to say that we know the definition, but let's maybe one way to look at it is to define it is by looking, I know this is going to seem weird, but by looking at this little bullet point, if text biggest names use a, like we can define it by looking at what this is saying. If text biggest names use a mono repo, should we do the same? Some of text biggest names use a mono repo, including Google, Facebook, Twitter, and others. Now, that statement's not enough to tell me what that means, but maybe I can glean from it that if I went to Facebook, they wouldn't say, hey, so here's I don't know what they use there, but let's just pretend it's GitHub Enterprise. Here's our GitHub Enterprise, and your team owns these 4 repos. It's sounding to me like it's, hey, Facebook is in this monster.
Right.
And when you commit to it, Facebook gets updated.
It might not be what it means, right? By the way, I think we can change this text should say Google, Facebook, Twitter, and Jonas RC86. Because our viewer Jonas RC86 prefers monorepo. We'd like to hear to hear the thoughts on why, but I mean that sincerely. But let's add that to this list as well. I don't know Jonas RC, but Jonas RC is in favor. But yeah, you're right. You don't know if it means they have one monorepo or multiple monorepos, and also just because the biggest names in tech use it doesn't mean I should, because I'm building a different product than they are, and so who knows what that. So I don't know where the line is, and so the people like Jonas RC and Mike Shea is saying he generally uses a mono repo. What is that line in the sand when something's a mono repo? Is it that my company has 200 applications and are all in some repo, or does it mean that we group like suites of applications together into a mono repo? That's what I'm not really sure about. And maybe that was the right word when I said like a suite of applications, right? We think of those things that go together, you know.
Well, let's take an example, right? I believe it's correct to say, although I don't know this for sure, but I believe it's correct to say that the Windows source code is in a mono repo. Mm-hmm. I don't think that they felt that way. I don't know, 15 years ago, maybe even actually, let's go all the way back to like say a Windows 98. It was just a monster, and it had to be somewhere, so it was in their source control system. Like these weren't issues that you thought about then. Right, it was like, well, we got to have source control for Windows. And how many developers have to have access to it? A bajillion. And teams have builds that only, if you're the team that's working on like ActiveX, do you really need to have entire Windows built, or just can little components be built so that you can keep working on ActiveX and get that into the product? Wow, what a blast of the past that is, right? But what we see is because of the history that Microsoft actually invented. I don't know if this is the name of it. I thought it was called the Git large file system. I thought it was called Git LFS. Here it says Git VFS, but it doesn't matter. They invented a little attachment to Git that allows them to take all of those assets that aren't text file based and get them out of Git, because Git's not really that great at managing them, and it can also really bloat your repository. So they came up with a system to be like, okay, we want it to feel like they're in Git, but we don't want them to actually be in Git. So they had to deal with this issue. Right. But what were they going to do? They weren't going to split it up. At least I don't think they were. Like, would you? I don't know. We've seen the ASP.NET team both expand and contract. I don't have specific answers for you, but I do remember times where they were like, yeah, we're gonna do SignalR in another repo, and then they were like, it's really becoming a pain to work with, and SignalR is becoming very core, and I don't mean, when I say that, I don't mean .NET Core. It's becoming a part of our core, so we're moving it in. If you go look at the ASP.NET SignalR repo today, it's going to tell you this has been moved into the main ASP.NET repo. So I think that what an article like this points out is maybe it educates you into when you might notice that you should change, or maybe that you are kind of dooming yourself by stubbornly sticking to your poly repo strategy.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's an interesting article. I obviously didn't read it all, but while we were doing like the little half-hour research before the show, I was like, I wonder if this will come up. So
Yeah,
I grabbed
that's interesting. Mike says, can you post a link to that? Can you add that to the chat?
Yep.
Happy to do that, right?
And again, I don't know the person's. Just the fact that they've written it down, it makes it interesting. I imagine we could have a lot of people come on and tell us different benefits, right?
Yeah.
I don't know that there's an answer there.
So I was wondering about security for repos. And now, obviously, I'm not talking about like public Git repos, but I'm talking about within an organization, right? Within a company. If you have, let's say, I guess that would mean you'd either have to have like a private GitHub repo, or
I just stopped sharing.
Yeah, I switched it back. Thanks. Or in the case of like what I do, which is Azure DevOps, we have a secured environment, I guess you would say, and we have repos, and I don't think I'm giving away any security secrets here in public. I like to be careful about that. But my point is, we have a development team, and everyone in the development team has access to the repos, right? And we don't say that my repos for let's say it's my team within the department. I work in an IT department where we have multiple teams of developers. Some people don't. Some people just work on a team. That's the whole department. So is there any value, or do you see organizations where they restrict like my repos and your repos as separately secured things? I was just wondering if that's something that people see or do, or
I've seen it. Now, to be fair, so I've worked at places that maybe had like 10 developers, and then I've worked at places that are probably in the Fortune like 10. So you get different experiences. And when you're in the latter one, then there was a lot of like, you had to have access to the repositories. And, for no other reason than sanity, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
If you also consider that, hey, we're big enough that, sure, we trust our employees are great, but when you're a corporation that size, you do worry about the problem of insider espionage. Like, it's a bigger deal than it is if you're a 10-person startup. It's just a fact, right? And so I think some of it is just to say, look, it's not that we don't trust our employees, but if we say that employees only have eyes on the code that they should be working on, then we've solved a whole bunch of problems related to corporate espionage, international espionage, right?
Yeah. I think you make some good points. There's some, there could be some value to that. But I wonder, like, I don't know if it's considered like a best practice in like all organizations, right? I'm wondering if I don't think it is to do that. I was just kind of wondering.
Oh no, I think there are certainly orgs that say, look, we're all innovators, and so anybody can innovate on anything. And I don't want to say that's bad or even ridiculously idealistic. I imagine what happens is you come to that conclusion that you can no longer operate that way because of some risk. Mm-hmm. Certainly, sometimes people might just rule with an iron fist, and you say, like, "Hey, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, why? Just because you wanted to play with the security settings, it makes you like, what's the point of that?
Why, right? Like, I try to find the sweet spot between having policies that make sense, right, and being secure and following best practices, and yet be as frictionless as possible, right? Create rules where we need to have rules and not just put rules in. I think it just makes everybody happier, and it's a lot less work to not have all those extra rules. Also, it's just more stuff to deal with. Another question I had, and this kind of came up really quick, and I think we like blew past it. I think you were starting to ask this too. Is do you guys have rules that like a certain person has to do code reviews, like a team lead always has to do a code review, or someone in the chat said, and maybe it was Mike said, 2 developers had to do code reviews on code, which I think is an interesting idea. I will just say that where I am, we generally have like a 1-person code review. And what I'm trying to do, and I'll just throw this into the conversation as well. I'm trying to get to the point where the person doing the code review maybe isn't even on the team, right? Because, and tell me if this is a good idea or bad. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. But at a certain point, code is code, right? If you're a good developer, you can review my code, whether you're on the team that I work in. And then you get into the difference between business logic. Like, am I reviewing the business logic or am I reviewing the code, right? Like, do I need to understand the domain to do a code review, the problem domain? I just threw out a whole bunch of stuff there, but what do you think about that stuff?
So I haven't thought about that first idea that you mentioned of the developers that review don't even have to be on the same team, quote unquote. Like they don't live in that code base every day, so to speak. I'd never thought about that before, but that's interesting. And we're already seeing some answers that kind of say like, that's a really, that's a good idea. So the first thing that jumps to mind is you say, well, wait a second, is everybody going to have the proper context? But that's probably just being too old-fashioned and controlling and like, oh, how would you have the context to know whether that's good or bad? Like, no, that's not the point. And like you said, when it comes to the business logic, right? So sometimes code that you commit might very clearly express what could be written down on paper, especially if it reads more like a book. And I'm not talking about the quality of the code. I'm just saying sometimes the algorithm you write is very much like, well, if number of books checked out is greater than 3 and all are past due, then you can't check out any more books. And it just reads great. Other times it's like, wow, even if I had the business analyst here, they would have no idea how to look at this. Like what could they contribute to this discussion,
Maybe the question is, what's expected from a code review? Like, is there an expectation that the person that's doing a code review is looking, at the code or making sure the logic is correct? And I think we often think it's a little bit of both of those things. But, to tell you the truth, business logic can often be validated with unit tests, right? If I have a rule that says you can only, what were you saying there before, you can only check out 3 books at a time or something like that, I can have a unit test to check that pretty quickly and pretty safely. But what a code review to me, what we're often looking to do is really make sure that we're building something that's not going to be like error prone, problematic, that's going to be easy to refactor down the line, like it's a different set of things. But I don't know, because I think a lot of times code reviews, people are starting to get into, well, let me explain the business logic, and is that really the right time for? I don't know. I don't have answers. I have questions.
Right. In fact, there are a few people that I want. I would like if we could talk to about code reviews, like specific targets in mind, who I think are experts in the field, and I think it'd be great if we could talk to them. So maybe that's a future thing. I don't want to get too far ahead because
maybe you can pull up Mike's comment here. I think Mike's got a good comment there. If you could throw that up on the screen, supportability, security, best practices, and performance, and then he adds error handling after that. Right? Maybe is that what a code review is? I'm saying is that I tend to agree, by the way, but is the business logic so? If we're talking about what Mike says here, and he also mentioned some other stuff, there's a little bit more there. The question is, it doesn't matter if you're on the same team. A good developer is a good developer, right? And I'd like to get to. I'm saying this like out loud. I'd like to get to a place where the unit tests really solve the business logic problem. The unit tests understand the rules, but the code review is making sure we're building like I don't want to say the word solid because I don't mean solid principles, but that we're building a solid application, right? That will withstand the demands.
Yeah.
It's tricky, right? Elegant.
Yeah, and then certainly, you know, to bring it back to source control, I really do think that that the pull request kind of became where previously the code review portion, it was a little nebulous where you would put that. Now it's like crystal clear. I think. I mean, I don't. Who's doing code reviews before it's in a pull request? And certainly you and I could. We could say like, hey Andy, come take a look at this. But a formal code review as part of your team's process is happening in a pull request. I don't think it's happening before where it's like, hey, can I get a pull request on this? It's in this branch. Like that's not happening anymore. It's our tools have it as a first class feature. It's almost like you're putting the flag in the sand. Pull request ready. You know?
I think it's become synonymous. Like is a pull request is become synonymous with a code review, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I guess maybe for some folks who were around before these tools, it wasn't always that way. Is all I'm kind of saying. So to me, source control has maybe advanced that or given it a little bit of maturity.
Well, it certainly made it easier.
I mean, look at what else is getting added to our source control system. Like, before GitHub, we had tools like TeamCity, or automated build systems. There was another cruise control. I remember there being one
Jenkins cruise control. But those aren't source control systems, right? You said before GitHub, right?
No. So I didn't finish my statement. Is we had those before, and that's not your fault. I didn't finish it. I got lost. We had those before, and yet now look what we're seeing get put into Azure DevOps and GitHub and Bitbucket. Bitbucket has Bitbucket pipelines, and Azure has Azure pipelines, and GitHub has GitHub Actions, and it seems like developers kind of want that to happen. Maybe not all of them. There might be some that are like, man, this doesn't hold a candle to Jenkins, and you are all ridiculous you are using.
Yeah, so when you say the
integrated CI/CD.
Yeah, and you want it you said integrated, right? Like all in one spot.
Right.
Well, that's funny because when really one of the first to do that, I could be wrong, but I think TFS sort of was one of the first, and people said, "Oh, that's totally the wrong way to do it. You should have." Find the best in breed and go to, your source control should be here and your build should be here and, your releases should be there and, whatever.
I think the Rational Suite had it too.
Okay.
But the timing might be off. But I think that at the time it was like you either went TFS or you went Rational /IBM once they bought it. And JetBrains is also in that. And I didn't remember the name. I think Mike is saying it's called JetBrains Space. I believe that. I could go look it up, but
you're supposing though that we've gone the opposite direction where people want like a suite of tools all together. Is that what you're sort of proposing?
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that the concept of a GitHub or a Bitbucket is so popular that then what got added to GitHub? Issues. Oh, and then wikis, and then boards, and now we're seeing actions, and it's like, whoa, it's almost like, well, let's take Confluence and shove it into GitHub, and let's take Trello and shove it into GitHub.
Oh, yeah,
are they as good as all of them? No. But when you're an open source project, can you afford to not have everything in one place?
Well, sure, you're right. Can you? But I think it's not even. I don't know if afford is the first problem that comes up. I mean, I think the bigger thing is it's convenience, right?
It's convenient, sure.
Like it's hard to set this stuff up. It really is. It's not easy. It's and so we've used this word on the show a couple of times. Say frictionless. I think we've used right. Or we were talking about something before the show, but it's frictionless to just have these
You
things,
like things to be frictional
in there together. And that's one of the reasons why, in some of my old talks, when I used to do talks about TFS in particular, I would say, do I think they have the best in breed version control? You could argue maybe that, this was back when SVN was big, right? I said, well, maybe SVN is better. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Do they have the best work item tracking? No, maybe you want to use something else for your work items, right? Do they have the best? Maybe you want to use Jenkins instead. But I say, you know what? I'm willing to take the sacrifice on some of those systems not being quite as good, maybe not the full best in breed, but because they work together so easily. It was just so nice.
Yeah.
The way, work items could be related to source code and builds and all that kind of stuff. There's all that, right? So I think it's just a natural progression that companies want to add features. They have to show that they're better than somebody else who's adding more features. And so there you go. You get like all the, you get all these things added in. Yeah, I see that comment you just popped up there, but it's not best in breed, probably. I think it's pretty high up in breed, probably, right? I'm pretty happy with it. It's kind of interesting because so many people are, just when they talk about Git, it just has to be GitHub, and I don't know. I just always do Git in Azure DevOps. I got my pipelines in Azure DevOps. Pipelines are terrible for deployments. Well, they're painful. We gotta be, Rich isn't on the call today, right? So we can, Rich would defend all those things, of course. But I have my issues with some of those things as well. I find ARM templates to be challenging. I find YAML pipelines to be challenging. I think they're all well-intentioned and pretty good options, but they're still challenging, right? That's the way I would say. I spend much too much time working on those parts of my applications and less on code and more on the pipelines and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. I mean, there's certainly a lot that we could talk about. This could go on and on. We could do like a whole show on like trunk-based development, which is a model where you basically concentrate on trunk. And the reason why trunk-based development, I think, came up is because of a very famous, I think, super famous blog post that I feel like everyone has seen.
All right, let me put up your screen. Hang on, let me go back.
And I'm actually going to scroll down a little bit.
Okay, well, you're up on there now.
Tell me if you've seen that graphic.
Oh, yeah, sure. I have that tattooed. I have that tattoo of that. No, I don't.
So this was from a famous blog post from 2010 called "A Successful Git Branching Model." And I will be honest, and it's not because I'm contrarian or anything, but the first time I looked at this, I was like, I don't like this at all for Git. And I have even brought it up in some of my Git talks about how I don't like this at all. This is subversion to me. So I wanted to find this post. It's super easy to find. You just always Google a successful Git branching model and you find it. And so today, it's been many moons since I've looked for it. Today, when I find it, to my surprise, I see. And look, Vincent's a smart guy. I mean, he wasn't a nobody when he wrote this in 2010. It wasn't even dumb. Like, it's not like, it's just, I just didn't like it. He writes now in this forward, this note of reflection, and he basically goes on and says, like, look, I wrote this at a time when I was building software that had specific, explicitly versioned releases, and I needed to support multiple versions of the software in the wild.
Right.
It's like, but what if you're doing continuous delivery? Not so sure. I found that interesting, though, just that he conceded, like, hey, I wrote this for me in 2010, and you all went running with it.
Right. Yeah, and so, listen, let's go back to something you said, probably an hour ago. Is just because we say something on the show works for us doesn't mean that it's the right answer for you. It doesn't mean we shouldn't promote these ideas and write blog posts about these ideas, right? But when we're putting these ideas out there, whether it's on a show like ours or in a blog post or whatever, what the consumers of this information need to do is take that information and then say, how well does this work for me? Like, I say it so many times, Chris, you've heard me say it when I start like a presentation. Don't follow this thing, whatever it is I'm talking about, because I'm telling you it worked good. Follow it because maybe you're trying to solve the same problem as me, right? If you're not, it might not be good for you. So he's gone back and he's kind of cleaning this up a little bit and saying, this worked great for the problem I had at the time, right? And if you have similar problems, this might be good. But this diagram, I've had so many arguments with people where they say, well, this is the way to do it. This is the Git branching strategy that you should be taking. And I say, well, I don't think it works really well for our organization, right? It's interesting. It's interesting. I'd like to go back and read the forward a little bit more. By the way, while we're at it, why don't you throw that up link in the chat? Do you mind?
Yeah, like I said, this was the classic, and it still is the same link. This link has been on the web for 10 years, and I've gone back to it time and again, and not necessarily to just say like, people are like, hey, explain branches to me, and then they'll start talking about like, well, should you have a develop branch and a hotfix branch? And I'm like, you're talking about this, aren't you?
Right.
And I never really liked it, but to be fair, and it's not because I didn't like what he was saying, I got it that if you were in the position where you release software on a 1.0 and then you got to start working on 1.1 and then you actually were going to push code back to 1.0, okay, fine. Like I get it that those branches have to live a long time.
Yeah.
But I will admit that and we're going to say it depends here. I feel like most projects that I'm seeing benefit more from the trunk is what represents our publications. Branches represent my going off and working on something so that it doesn't get in the way, and then my gift back, my pull request, my gift back to the trunk, means that we can now ship. And that's a really oversimplification. So do I think like this is the way? I'm not suggesting that to anyone here either. I would just say that, hey, this is an interesting site, trunk-based development. This gives you something to consider. You can read it and then say, you know what? I've looked at everything they've talked about, and this isn't going to work for us, and that's fine.
So the branches, so in this case, those aren't feature branches. Those are, or are they? Or is that just a weird name for them because it says release 12.1?
He kind of says like, why do you branch, right? You can basically what the idea is that you wouldn't want a team to branch on release 12.1 and then sit on that branch for 6 months because they're working on 12.1. Like that's what you're trying to avoid. You're trying to avoid, which is a scenario I've been part of, by the way, of like, all right, let's start the branch for 12.1. Then instead, what they're kind of saying, do they have a better look? Oh yeah, I guess this is it. For a smaller team where they say, you're not really committing to release branches, you're committing to the trunk. You try to stream small commits straight into the trunk. And then they do have some reasons like, well, why would you branch? Well, okay. There might be some aspect of repetition that makes it longer to complete the code. So therefore, they'll say, well, here's why you might branch, right?
I think
here's your ideal.
Yeah, I think I understand a little better now. If you go back to the diagram, the point of the release branches, I think, are to support, like you make that branch so you can do bug fixes, probably stuff like that. But if you're working on work, you work right in the main line and in the trunk. And so that maybe follows something that's similar to what I do, which is I do not believe that the master or the trunk, whatever we're calling it, needs to be deployable at all times. That's a little controversial. Like a lot of people really have a problem with that. And I say, it doesn't have to be deployable as long as we know where the deployable spots are there. It's pretty easy to do a build based on a commit version or something like that, right? You know what I mean? Like I can go back in time very easily and get the code that I want to have. And so my feeling on this is I try to say, let's do as little. I like some of the aspects of this because the less branching, the less merging, the better, right? Whereas that's not to say don't do branching, right? That is definitely not what I'm saying. It's kind of like that frictionless thing. Like do what you need. Don't make branches just to have branches, and don't keep forking and branching and bending and twisting and going off in all these different directions where you have to do 25 commits back into 25 different places, But the other thing I don't like, and this is one of the reasons why I like the sort of feature branch stuff, is I don't like cherry picking. I'm not a big fan of that. Again, this could be a controversial statement. I'm just simply stating my opinion. But I don't like builds that are based on like cherry picking. I think that's where problems get introduced. Things get missed. And so if you think something's going to go longer than when you're going to do your next deployment, it is really nice to have it in a branch, right? And have it be in a safe place where I can easily deploy without that stuff. Is that kind of...
Yeah, and so I'm surprised to hear if maybe there were people that you've worked with that advocate like, well, here, I'm not going to bother merging this in, just cherry pick this commit. I'll agree that the number of times I've used cherry pick, like for real, and not just because I'm like going to do a Git talk.
Yeah.
I don't even need a hand to count all the times that I've actually used it for real at work and thought it was the right thing to do.
Right. I'm talking about a strategy. Let's just to clarify this. Let's make sure we're talking about
the same thing. You might not be talking Git cherry pick.
Well, what I'm talking about, I think it is, but where people commit lots of stuff into whether it be a branch or whether it be master, which is a branch, whatever it is. The code is committed into some place, and we need to do a deployment, right? Mm-hmm. And of the stuff that's in that branch that we're going to deploy from, not everything is going to go. So people say, well, then you just cherry pick out the stuff you want to have, right? And build a new branch off of that or whatever it is, or do a build off of that. And to me, that sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I'm kind of more of a fan of like it should fit with the code we just deployed. Otherwise, like, I mean, there are different reasons why, but I'm a big, I didn't want to get too much into the technical specifics, but I'm a big fan of if I'm working on a branch, I rebase it onto master before I offer that pull request. And it's mainly because I do want to step into a time machine and act as though I started the work after the current work was done.
So do me a favor.
I do want to have that ability.
Yeah, do me a favor and use maybe like layman's terms for people like myself. What do you mean by when you say rebase onto master? Like, help me out with that.
Well, what I mean is that on Monday I start a feature branch and I work on it, and I end up having 3 commits. And why do I have 3 commits? Well, one of them is because I actually did think it was a pretty good stopping point, and it makes good sense to package that up and say I did this thing. Mm-hmm. And then the second one was just because it was Friday, and I didn't want to leave it on my machine in case my machine blows up. And then the third one was because after talking through the code with you gave me a really great tip, and I implemented it, and so I've got 3 commits. Okay. I started that on Monday. Mm-hmm. But since Monday, the trunk has moved on by 2 or 3 commits. Mm-hmm. So I am now in the place that Git likes to call 3 commits ahead and 3 commits behind. And there's nothing wrong at all with me just saying, well, let me just create a pull request, and those will be merged, and we'll now have a parent that points down these 2 lines of development. But what I like to do is, instead of taking that chance and merging it, I'm kind of like, well, wait a second. I would much rather use a tool that I have in my toolkit called Git rebasing, which is to basically pick up my 3 commits and plant them on top of the current trunk, mm-hmm. and then see how the code works.
Yeah. No, I thought that was 100% not just like you're sort of saying that's optional. And in my world, I've always thought that's sort of like required. Like I thought you had to do that. Now I've never called it rebasing. Maybe I don't do it right. I'm sort of doing like a merge from master. Like I'm going to master and I'm merging the changes into my branch. Maybe there's an easier way to do that, or maybe that is just called rebasing. But I think that's like that should be required, I think.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of git merge master, but it can be okay. Where I don't like it is if I do a git merge master and then before I get this branch, before I get taken to master, then more commits get added. Right. That's what starts like that figure 8 look.
So rebase. And I think So if I'm on a branch, if it started on master, is this just like an easy way for me to just say I want to rebase that thing, and it's just gonna? Let me switch back to your share here.
I'm not sure if there's an animation that like shows it.
Yeah.
Because I actually have been looking for. It says plays with animations, huh?
And I'm just gonna say now for like people, I'm getting tired tonight, so I think we're gonna wrap up after this. But
yeah. I think there's
talk.
like a whole show here. We've had it before, but maybe not really talking about it. This isn't really it. For me, it's about. So I guess what I will tell you is that because I really think of Git repo as a graph of commits, that it does mean something different to me whether I merge 2 lines of commits and create a parent commit with 2 children, or whether I pick up these commits that were diverged here, I pick these up and I plant them on top, so now I have a straight line. That kind of means something different to me in my head, but yes, practically speaking, many times it's identical outcome. So okay. I'm not like a zealot about it, but people will ask me like, well, why do you always do that? And I said, well, I think it makes my brain hurt less. But I don't mind. I don't get upset if other people don't do it.
Right.
I just feel like
you usually simplify these things. In the past, you've simplified some Git stuff for me very much, and I appreciate that. This is a place where, we talk around, you've said, certain topics. That's what's great about us having 3 hosts of the show. In addition to the fact that we love to hear from viewers and their feedback and their suggestions, because we know that the 3 of us aren't right about everything. We might be right about most stuff, but not everything. But we know
not
that
anything.
Rich has a certain skill set that he's really good at. We would lean on him on certain things. I have a skill set on certain things. You have like Git is one of those things where I definitely like go to you. I'm like, Chris, I got questions about Git and stuff like that. Hey, look at that! It's funny. Your screen says that's a wrap, and I feel like that should be the end of the show.
I just wanted to make sure we showed this before we ended.
What's this? What is this?
I didn't want to interrupt you. I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to.
No,
throw you off track.
I hear people
GitHub Universe is GitHub's conference, and it just ended.
Yeah.
And so this is like, if you're into AWS reInvent or Google I/O or Microsoft Build, this was GitHub's. It was last week. I have not gotten to dig into it yet, but it's all online. It's all here. Nice. Some of the things I'm really interested in are a couple. I'm interested in seeing what Kelsey. We know Kelsey Hightower in the Microsoft world. He's a friend. He's not working in Microsoft Stack, but he's a friend to the Microsoft MVPs and so on. At least I don't think he is working in it. I don't want to speak for Kelsey. He spoke at .NET Conf. Was it .NET Conf or was it Build? I don't remember now. I remember that he had
Kelsey. So.
Yeah, he had a prime spot where he and Jeff talked about Kubernetes. And Jeff brought him on specifically to say, like, we're not here to talk. Kelsey's a Kubernetes expert. It applies to us. He's not here. We're not requiring him to be a .NET Kubernetes expert, right? We're here because what he says can help us. Okay. So I'm interested in seeing his talk. I'm interested in seeing more. Allison is a name you will probably remember. Her name just changed because she's recently married, and I'm terrible at saying her name before was Allison Buchholz Al. Do you remember that name? Maybe it's just because I'm too involved. I pay too much attention to the people who work on tools.
Yeah, I probably
But she worked on Visual Studio, I believe, for a long time. Yeah. So to see that she's moved to the Code Spaces team, I was like, oh, wow, that's cool to me. I want to see what she had to say. And then, to be honest, there's such other stuff in here that's really interesting. Like, this particular talk is the people who maintain a project called YouTube DL, an open source project, and like they're talking about what it's like to be a maintainer and how difficult it actually is. This was one that was really interesting to me. Was
look at that.
So you can get it a secret.
Oh, Sasha Rosenbaum. That's a name I recognize, actually. Yeah.
Okay.
From Twitter. Okay. Yeah.
All right. So yeah, interesting stuff. So, I don't believe that like some of the bigger conferences, there's hundreds of talks here, but I was gonna say I don't know. Maybe there are. Maybe there really are.
There doesn't need to be hundreds, right? There needs to be, and it's free. So
right.
You get what
That's
you get.
the thing that I kind of like is that maybe you can actually consume a lot of this, right? Mm-hmm, so there's some interesting stuff. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure people knew about that since we were talking about source control, that GitHub Universe is over, and if you didn't know about it, then definitely check out GitHubUniverse.com, which I think is
post that link.
Think all you need is GitHubUniverse.com.
Right.
But there it is. GitHub.
Are you going to do one of your cool little link list things? What's that called?
I don't know if I have one for tonight.
Okay.
But I mean, certainly. Here's what we'll do. Is there will be one. I promise there will be one on the YouTube video. Because, but if I go back looking through this and say, oh wow, we talked about some of this other stuff too.
Oh, I got you. Yeah, you can go back and fill in the blanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's cool.
All right, Andy. Well, hey, good conversation.
Yeah,
hopefully we didn't. Hopefully, it didn't digress too much. It's easy for me to do that.
Yeah, for both of us, right? We can go off on tangents. Listen, we had great participation from the audience, which is really what gets me excited about the show. I just love it. I love hearing from people. I know you do. I know Rich does as well. But it's great. I mean, Mike and Jonas. I'm looking back up through here now. Jonas and there were some other people on earlier that were contributing. Falcon was on there for a while and talking about some stuff. And also those people that are just hanging out and they're not contributing. We love that they're here too. We don't mind that at all, right? We're happy with everybody.
Yeah.
But Oh, you just posted here. We'll be back January 6th, right? Because we are taking a few weeks off for the holidays, stuff like that, and we got to regroup and come up with some shows and come up with some topics. But this was fun. I had a really good time tonight.
Cool, awesome. That's good to hear. Hopefully you had a good time too, and hopefully, I again, it was great to hear what people were doing at their work and to hear their conversation. Sometimes we didn't get to the comment directly, but I always try to at least say like, hey, that's a great comment. Maybe we kind of moved on from it. Let's get it up on the ticker so that just everybody can benefit, whether you're watching in the future on YouTube. And no matter where you're watching us, if you're watching on Twitch and you hit that follow button, or you're watching on YouTube and you hit that subscribe or that like, or leave us some comments down below. No matter what, we'll be here Wednesdays, 8:30 in the new year, 2021. It's on its way. It's almost here. And it'll be interesting to look back this time next year. I don't think any of us at all, if we did an end of year wrap up in 2019, none of us would have hit the bingo card for 2020. There's just no way. Wouldn't have happened. This time last year, we were in the Malvern studio. We were working on doing some remote shows, and we'd even tried it. But I think we've certainly now, out of necessity, this is how things are done.
Yeah.
So I certainly would not have hit that this year. I don't know if I hit any of the goals that I set out for myself, because we did say, what do you want to do? What do you want to learn in 2020? And I think a lot of that might have gotten put on hold. But in any case, we're here. And hopefully to everybody watching, no matter when you are, you're here with us. You have your health, you have your family and your loved ones, everybody that's important to you, and are prosperous in what you're doing, no matter what that is and how you define it. So in any case, take care of yourself, Take care of yourself, you and your family. Andy, have a great holiday. And for Andy Schwamm, I'm Chris Gomez, and we will see you next year on the Dev Talk Show. Thank you, everybody.